blowflies. Amazing insects that can smell dead flesh 1.5 miles away. But can an unusual bug expert use the blowflies to help solve a gruesome family tragedy? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. What holds a family together? Father, mother, child? They are bound to each other by blood, but what keeps them together or tears them apart is sometimes a mystery. It is the summer of 1992 in a pleasant neighborhood in Toronto. The Sharif family have emigrated to Canada looking for a better life. On this quiet street, they appear to have found it. But their neighbor, Lucy Materi, begins to notice something strange. Newspapers are piling up. Over the course of several days, Lucy has seen no evidence of the family. Have they simply gone on vacation without bothering to mention it? Lucy discovers that the connecting door to the house is unlocked. She now fears that the home may have been burglarized. Once inside, she is overpowered by a terrible smell and heat as intense as a car exhaust. The ground floor appears tidy and undisturbed. Police are called to the scene and begin their investigation. The detective in charge examines the decomposing body of Zara Sharif on the upstairs landing. In the master bedroom, he discovers the body of her husband, Youssef Sharif. And in the bedroom down the hall, their 12-year-old daughter, Rajoul. It's a triple homicide.
In this case, we needed a forensic pathologist to examine the bodies because of the extensive decomposition. We wanted to look at the bodies before we move them. That's always a big concern in the case of decomposition. We also had a very gory scene with a lot of blood splattering.
Blood spatter expert Kimberly Johnston is called in to help reconstruct the events.
The first thing was not so much what I saw, but what I heard. And as I realized later, it was the sound of maggots. One of the vivid memories I have is working in one room and hearing the maggots on the body of one of the victims in another room. It's not something you easily forget.
Maggots have infected the decomposed bodies of all 3 victims, and the room is buzzing with flies. Maggots are the intermediate stage between fly larvae and the adult blowflies. Samples of the maggots, flies, and fly larvae will be sent to an entomologist to help determine the time of death. Since flies don't lay eggs on living flesh, if he calculates the onset of colonization, he will know the time of death. For the police, fixing a time of death will be a crucial element in catching the family's murderer. Police question Lucy Materi, trying to get a sense of the family. Lucy didn't know the family well. They were quiet, kept to themselves, appeared pleasant and hardworking. The family left the house every morning at 8:15. Mr. Sharif was a manager. Mrs. Sharif worked as a cashier in a supermarket. Their daughter Rajul was a bright 7th grader who once told Lucy she dreamt of being a writer. Lucy cannot imagine that they had enemies. In the master bedroom, blood spatter analysis reveals that Mr. Sharif suffered multiple heavy blows to the head with a blunt instrument. It suggests that his assailant was filled with rage.
The male was probably initially attacked when he was asleep, and he didn't really have much of a chance to put up a fight or defend himself. The woman, on the other hand, knew what was coming when she was killed and was obviously trying to get away from her attacker. She knew what was coming, and she knew what had happened to her husband.
The daughter Rajul, however, has not been brutally beaten. Has her killer for some reason taken pity on her? In the bathroom, forensic ident officers take blood samples from a towel found on the floor and from the bathtub. But is the blood that of the victims or the assailant? Evidence in the home suggests a robbery turned violent. Drawers have been ransacked. Mrs. Sharif's purse has been opened and her wallet removed. Police examine the house for signs of forced entry. They also dust for fingerprints that might reveal the intruder's identity. Outside, Lucy tells police the Sharifs have another child, an 18-year-old genius son by the name of Nassim. He has been away at university for most of the year, but Lucy vaguely remembers seeing him around the Sharif's house 5 or 6 days ago.
And we, at that point, set up the people in place, the officers in place, and the resources in place to conduct a ground search looking for a 4th body. At that point, we were looking for a 4th body.
Is Nassim the 4th victim of the killer? And who is responsible for the brutal murders of his family? 3 members of the Sharif family have been murdered in their home by an unknown assailant. Police have no leads. No murder weapon has been found. Their most immediate concern, though, is 18-year-old Nassim Sharif, who is classified as missing. When they call his university, the registrar says no one has seen the boy since classes ended the week before. As the search for the killer continues, forensic entomologist Neil Haskell begins analysis of fly larvae taken from the bodies of the victims.
The task that was set before me by the chief coroner was to ascertain, if I could, a reasonable time when these individuals had actually died.
The flies are reared in a temperature-controlled environment.
For this particular case, I used the very specific method of taking individual species growth and development rates and then applying it to the stages and life cycles that we recovered in this case.
He must now factor in the temperature that existed in the house at the time of death.
When we're dealing with cold-blooded creatures, the insects, temperature is a dependent factor which drives the growth and development of these little creatures. And the temperatures, if it's cold, then these insects are going to grow very, very slowly. Or even if it's below freezing, they won't grow at all. But if it's very warm, if it moves into the 20 to 25, 30 degree centigrade range, then growth and development can occur very, very quickly.
To determine what the temperature would have been inside the Sharif home, an engineering firm is hired to take regular readings in the closed-up house. This data is sent to Haskell. Meanwhile, police are still searching for Nassim. Then, unexpectedly, police get a break. A friend of Nassim's reads about the murders. Nassim has been staying with him and knows nothing of his family's tragedy. His friend calls police to have them break the news to Nassim. The detective tells Nassim that his father, mother, and sister have all been murdered. Nassim is shocked. He struggles to take it in. He mumbles that he is now an orphan. How will he survive? Nassim's parents have done everything for him, made him the center of their lives, given him the best school. Even though Rajul was a bright student, because she was a girl, Nassim's parents put all their savings into his education. Nassim was sent to a special prep school. He was then accepted to university with advanced standing. His achievements were a source of great pride to his family. Police, meanwhile, get the results of the blood samples found in the bathroom.
The blood that was found on the towel in the bathroom was consistent with having come from the adult male. Obviously, my opinion is that he didn't put it there himself.
How did it get there if Mr. Sharif was murdered while he slept? Did the killer take time to clean himself after the murders? Meanwhile, the pathologist report arrives, confirming that Mr. and Mrs. Sharif died from massive skull fractures. Rajul's death is attributed to asphyxiation. With no leads and no suspects, police asked Nassim for help.
I wanted to, as tactfully as possible, get as much information from him that I could that may be of assistance to us in our investigation. And he certainly seemed like he wanted to cooperate with that.
Nassim says he was last home on June 6th. That morning, his father drove him to the bus station.
He had left his parents and sister in good health and returned to university, as was planned, to spend time with his friends and to deal with matters necessary for his next year at university.
Towards the end of the interview, the detective is called into the hall. An officer hands him a postcard that just arrived at the Sharif house. It is from Nassim and is postmarked several days after the murders. In it, Nassim writes that he was trying repeatedly to get in touch with his parents and is very concerned about them.
In his words, he mentioned that I've been calling you and nobody answers. It's like nobody hears the phone.
The concern expressed in the card is in marked contrast to what Nassim has told the detective about leaving his family in good health. As the detective tries to reconcile this inconsistency, he mentally reviews the evidence so far. First, there was a bungled robbery, but given that nothing was taken, it now appears to have been staged. No fingerprints other than the family's were found inside the home, suggesting that the killer may not have been a stranger. Is it possible that Nassim is the killer they've been looking for? But why would a beloved son murder his entire family? Nassim Sharif is a suspect in the murders of his father, mother, and sister. But why would a beloved son murder his entire family? Police return to interview his friend, trying to get a sense of Nassim's life at school. It is here that a darker portrait begins to emerge. Contrary to the concern shown in his postcard, Nassim rarely called home, except to ask for money. He even used a payphone so the Sharifs wouldn't find out his residence number. After these calls, Nassim was given to bursts of anger and frustration. Nassim frequently stayed alone in his dorm during holidays when other students went home. He preferred to spend hours with a computer game called Morph, a game of battles and bloodshed at which Nassim excelled. As his obsession with the characters he created in the game increased, his personal hygiene and study habits began slipping. He became known for his offensive body odor, which his dorm mates called the Nassim smell. His friend mentions in passing that Nassim had no body odor the day he came to visit on June 6th. Police learn more. Nassim was not born in Canada. He had been left with relatives in his parents' country as an infant and brought over to join the Sharifs only 3 years ago to further his education. The pressure on him to succeed has been intense. A troubled boy, isolated at school, with his roots in another country. Is this why he became so obsessed with computer games?
That seems to be the type of activity where young people gravitate to that have lost control of their lives. So they create an environment where they are in control.
The detective asked for a copy of Nassim's final marks. Nassim has failed his year. Lack of evidence pointing to an outside assailant leads police to obtain a search warrant for Nassim's dorm room. In Nassim's backpack, they find an invoice for the sale of a new computer and a series of computer disks. The invoice corresponds to the computer seized at the Sharif home during the initial investigation. They also find a bus ticket purchased at 9:14 a.m., confirming Nassim was in Toronto on June 6th. Meanwhile, Dr. Haskell's findings come in, fixing the time of death.
The conclusions, based on the entomological evidence, showed that death of the individuals most likely occurred 5 to 6 days prior to the finding the bodies, and would be consistent with a time of death between sunset June 5th and sometime shortly after sunrise on June 6th.
On the strength of circumstantial evidence, Nassim is charged with the murders of his parents and his sister. He proclaims his innocence but will speak no further with police. They struggle to build a case against him. But they wonder, why would this brilliant student do such a terrible thing? As the trial approaches, Nassim maintains his silence. Police are frustrated. There is no physical evidence to prove that Nassim was in the Sharif home on the morning of June 6th. Then police shift their focus. Exhibit A, a computer disk. Can the information encoded on this disk be decoded to catch a murderer? The computer is analyzed by forensic experts. It shows that subdirectories were created on the 6th of June, one of which was called Games and included an advanced version of Morph. This particular file had been created at 12:56 a.m., well within the time Neil Haskell gave for the murders. The computer specialist next examined the disks seized from Nassim's knapsack. One of them contains a file of Morph identical to the one created on the Sharif computer on June 6th, proving that the unknown individual in the Sharif home was Nassim. Nassim played Morph late into the night while the rest of his family was asleep. Perhaps he became caught up in its fantasy world of power and violence, knowing at the same time that he had failed his school year, and believing that his parents would be furious when they found out. so he killed them. His father first, in an obvious fit of rage, as evidenced by the huge amount of blood spatter. Next, his mother, who he bludgeoned in the upper hallway as she tried to escape him. He then killed his sister, but less violently. He had no anger towards her, and may even have wished to spare her a life as an orphan. He staged what looked like a robbery to make it seem the killings were the work of an intruder. Then, he washed himself clean of his father's blood. He then left the house, thinking he had committed the perfect crime, and believing he was rid of his family and their expectations forever. Nasim Sharif is convicted of the second-degree murders of his father, mother, and sister.
He had no close ties to his parents or his sister. He never talked about them. He never wanted to go home. There was no homesickness while at university. He really had no close ties in a loving family. It's certainly unfortunate because that family was by all accounts, all our information was such a nice family, and his sister had so much potential. And he was a very smart young man, but for whatever reason, had so much stress in his life that it caused him to do such a horrendous act.
The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the victims are fictitious.